Hey everyone, M Productions Gaming here, and on today's episode of Pirate This, we'll be taking a look at a classic game made for the Amiga computer system called Leander. Now, a quick disclaimer, I know Leander was later released on the Sega Genesis, also known as the Mega Drive for those of you watching that aren't American. However, there were no anti-piracy measures that I experienced when playing that version, so this video will only focus on the original Amiga version. Before I get into Leander's anti-piracy measures, I first need to explain how the game is played for those who aren't familiar. At the start of each level, you're given instructions on where and how to find a specific special item. You then have to explore the stage to collect said item. Finally, once you have the item, you have to look for a teleportation gate to enter in order to finish the level and move on to the next. The teleportation gate will not activate until you find the special item of that level first. Now, this isn't a problem at first glance, but you'll see how this comes into play in a bit. Firstly, let's get the minor anti-piracy measures out of the way. One of which being that you deal half damage to enemies in a pirated copy than you normally would in a legit copy. Here's an example. Notice how it took me 2 hits in the pirated version to take out a regular enemy, compared to 1 hit in the legit version. And this is just the first level of the game, so you can imagine how unnaturally higher the difficulty can ramp up in later levels when dealing with tougher enemies. Although this makes the game a bit harder to get through, it's by no means impossible. Especially since if you're playing a pirated copy, you'll no doubt have access to optional mods included by the pirates who distributed the cracked game that can give you things such as infinite lives and unlimited money you can use to immediately buy the strongest weapons and armors in the game to compensate for the heightened difficulty curve. After playing for a while and adjusting to the lower damage output, you won't really notice anything else out of the ordinary until you reach the 4th level of the game. In this level, you're asked to find a silver bow and arrow. The item is located deep down within a cave. However, once you go down there to retrieve it, you can't get back up. And that's because there's a missing platform needed to climb back up to the cave's entrance. Now, remember what I explained about how the game works, being that you need to collect a special item and bring it to the teleportation gate to beat the level. This means your game is essentially soft locked here. You can't activate the gate to go to the next level without the silver bow, and if you go to collect the bow, the process of doing so will leave you permanently stuck down the bottom of a cave. And even though there are cheat codes in this game that can skip you ahead to certain levels, they don't work on pirated copies. In fact, none of the cheat codes made for this game work on pirated copies at all. The alternative to this would be hacking the game to let you skip ahead to the 5th level or beyond. Unfortunately, upon starting the level, your character will just fall straight through the ground due to there being no ground to stand on. This is because the level's been programmed to remove all its ground collision in pirated copies. And it's not just level 5 that does this. No matter what level you skip to, as long as it's after the 4th level, you'll always immediately fall through the ground to your death, and eventually lose all your lives. Sadly, after every tutorial I went through learning how to use both an Amiga Action Replay and the Amiga emulator's own memory debugger, I was unable to find a way to mod the game in any way that could get me to the next level, such as increasing a player's jump height, walking through walls, making the game think I got the treasure while at the start of the level, or just making the game think I completed the 4th level altogether. Despite me not being able to visually show off the 5th level onwards as I originally planned, I do want to give credit to a YouTube channel called GameHut who made a video about Leander's anti-piracy. It was thanks to him that I came across all this info to begin with. The person behind the YouTube channel is a man named John Burton, the very guy who programmed the game, its anti-piracy measures, and is the founder of the game's development company, Traveler's Tales. The link to his video on Leander will be included in the description. Now I would finish this video here, but I do know people in the comments section are going to ask why I didn't mention another form of this game's anti-piracy. More specifically, the laser cutter. As I mentioned earlier, John Burton, the programmer for Leander, made a video talking about a couple anti-piracy measures he implemented into the game, along with showing off some of the game's source code. The anti-piracy measure in particular was supposed to interact with how the game was physically manufactured. Leander, like all games for the Amiga, was released on floppy disks. And to summarize his video, according to Burton, when writing game code for a floppy disk, you're able to write data to any part of the disk you want. With this knowledge, he coded a sort of test into the game to write data to a specific spot of the disk. Next, a laser cutter is used on each floppy disk to physically burn a miniature hole in that same specific spot. Then, if the game fails to write data to that part of the disk, that means the test he coded comes back as negative, which also means the game knows it's a legitimate copy and will run as it's supposed to. However, if the game is able to write data to that part of the disk, that means the test results come back as positive, which then also means that the game knows that it's a pirated copy. In addition, Burton hid other blocks of code within the game's files as extra lines of defense to alert the game that it's a pirated copy. This was done in case bootleggers tampered with or removed the test code that checked for a laser cut. This was essentially how his explanation went. However, there's just one problem. Turns out, laser cutters were actually never used during the manufacturing of this game. Now I'm sure you're wondering how I know this, and here's a little funny story about that. You see, for the past several weeks, I was actually trying to get in touch with both Burton and anyone else involved with the making of Leander to ask some lingering questions I had about the game that were completely unrelated to the laser cutter, just so I could be better informed when making this video. Unfortunately, despite my efforts, I was unable to make contact with anyone, so I was left to do research to find the answers to my questions on my own. I never did find those answers, but I found something else instead. They were online threads on a forum site dedicated to the Amiga called English Amiga Board. The threads I found were about people who owned the original floppy disk of Leander, but saw that their disk had no holes in them, opposite to what was shown in Burton's video. In addition, the laser cutting claim was called into question by those same forum users due to, according to them, the high costs associated with having to mass produce floppy disks in the early 90s with precise laser cuts in them. Eventually, in 2019, a well-known gaming YouTuber named Modern Vintage Gamer created a forum thread of his own, asking if anyone had physical copies of Leander for proof of laser cutting. And this thread in particular was special because it was the only one, to my knowledge, that was brought to Burton's attention, all thanks to Twitter user MCBPete. It was then revealed that Burton was actually misinformed by his then publisher at the time, Psygnosis. Turns out, they initially planned to use laser cutting as an anti-piracy measure for Leander, until they later changed their minds not to. Was it due to high costs, like people theorized in online threads? Who knows? Unless the people in charge of making that decision back then speak up about it now, the actual reason is anyone's guess, so don't take my word for it. And naturally, since laser cutters were never used in the end, I'd have to assume that the laser test code was either disabled or removed entirely, or else people who owned legit copies of the game would have wrongfully suffered the game's anti-piracy measures. I'd also have to assume the other blocks of code Burton used as backups were given the same treatment, since they too were dependent on the final game having holes in its disk in order to work as intended. But, as I said, that's just my assumption. I don't want to spread any misinformation, so keep in mind I'm not stating any of this as fact. As we end this episode here, I ask that you please don't misconstrue what I've said as any sort of attack on Burton's credibility. As he said on this Twitter thread, he was simply misinformed and left out of the loop of how his game would be manufactured. And to give him the benefit of the doubt, he did make Leander 27 years ago by the time he made his own video about it in 2018. In addition, if any new information, corrections, etc. are brought to my attention regarding anything in this video, I'll consider making a part 2 to this episode. With all that said, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again in my next video.